my maternal grandfathers. I don't know, because they were from Missouri, and I don't know exactly how.
So
but then all of my relatives were from Missouri. All of Wayne's relatives were from Missouri too. So
you said your whole family came from Missouri then?
Yes. And Wayne's family did too. In fact, they kind of, I always get confused, and this was something I could look up in the box of stuff that's out that's still out in the basement, is I believe that my family my paternal side of the family my maternal side originated in Scotland.
Oh yeah.
Scotland, I think the Scotch people, or was it the other way around? Were they in Ireland? And they were in Ireland, and the Scotch people were wanting people to come and work, I think was what the deal was, I believe. And I get that mixed up.
I'm not sure. It depends on in history.
Yeah, and that's, this woman from Missouri has traced it clear back to, I don't know how far, so we should really get that. I guess you can cut and move stuff around. It's probably easier if it goes in order, but because Wayne's family came the same way, and there was a lot of people. It was the time of I think it was the potato famine, and
so the potato famine in Ireland.
I think in Ireland, and people were looking for things to do, and they could go to Scotland, and I suppose they probably had to have some means or be able to, they were probably indentured servants or indentured workers when they first went there, probably. That's probably why they came to the United States, to get out of there. But I've not really read up on that history like I should.
So you believe both yours and your husband started in Ireland. During the potato famine, they potentially first went to Scotland.
And it might have even been before that.
Before trying to flee from there as well to the U.S. to get a better life then.
And Adana has found some of them that were in England too. I think there was some marriages, from, and my Johnson family purportedly came from Sweden. Now I can't remember the name of the people that were in Sweden, but somewhere in this mess I have a piece of paper that I have written down what area or town or whatever of Sweden that they.
And so then the Johnsons would have been your mother?
No, that's
your father.
That's my dad's.
Your father, okay.
Side, and there was just his father and his father's brother. I just found came to Montana, but they did have some family that stayed in Missouri, and I have not figured out their names yet. So. Because it was just the two Johnsons, and I don't know what happened to the one. I know that my grandfather died in 1918, but I don't know what happened to his brother, because I don't remember any of the family ever talking about him. So I'm thinking either he.
1918 would have been about the First World War, so. There were lots of things going on in the world about then.
There was.
The Spanish pandemic.
Yeah, that's why we thought the grandfather, whose name was Edward William, sometimes written William Edward, is a little confusing because he went by either Bill or Will, but I think that was his middle name. Adana found his death certificate in Great Falls at the courthouse, but she didn't, if she made a copy of it, she didn't, she was looking on Ancestry, and it is there, so that would be a good place to
start on that side. So the Johnsons originally came from Sweden, were in Missouri, and then your dad and his brother came up here.
my, no, let's see, no, his dad.
Oh, right. So your grandfather and your great uncle came over here.
Apparently came
And so
here.
then, did your dad have siblings that you know of?
Yeah, he had one living, well, one that died when he was in his 20s, and then another brother that never married. So
You're the last
I'm
of
the
the line.
last of the line, I guess.
Because it doesn't sound like that you know of any family that great uncle had. Sounds like he might have been just a bachelor that moved up here.
I didn't even know about him until I was reading in a letter there just now. So, and I don't know whether it mentioned his name or not, because Johnson, as you know, is such a common name.
Yeah.
Well, I have a friend whose family came from Switzerland, and it's Jaeger. He's Jaeger, Y-A-E-E-A. I can't remember. And then some of them spelled it, some of them spelled it Y-A-E-G-E-R. Some of them spelled it Y-E-A-G-E-R. Some of it spelled Jaeger.
Oh, really?
So he finds relatives all over the place that
I guess in a time when not everyone learned to read and write, you knew what your name was, and then you figure out how to spell it later.
And sometimes, well, particularly the people that came in through Ellis Island, I think they oftentimes were given the guy, whoever was signing them in, just gave him a name he could spell. I don't know.
And there probably was some of that. And you were
But
dealing
mine
with
would have came before the Ellis Island, so that's why I need to look up in that box of stuff, because I know that at least part of them were here for the Revolutionary War, although they didn't get involved. That was my mother's side of the family, the Skaggs.
So your mother's side, the Skaggs, were the ones that were originally in the British Isles and then went to Missouri?
Yeah, they went to, it seems that they all went to Virginia. Well, it would be West Virginia, but it was all Virginia at that time. They went to Virginia, then they moved to Kentucky, then they ended up in Missouri.
Just followed the frontier a little bit, huh?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one of her ancestors was a contemporary of Daniel Boone, and I have somewhere I have written down a book somebody wrote about Daniel Boone, and this relative is mentioned in
that's really cool.
the book too. So
yeah, that's a long history to keep track of.
yeah, it is. Yeah, and like I say, I don't remember what the year is on this lady that's traced all the way back to the old country. And the Archer family, I know nothing about. That's my mother's mother.
So it would have been your maternal grandmother?
My maternal grandmother. I know they homesteaded down in the Maelstone area, Delphia. Have you ever heard of Delphia? It's
I
like
don't think
some
I've
of
heard of
those
that one.
highline towns that aren't there anymore.
Yeah, but at best a little country school on the side of a field.
Yeah. I think it's still on a Montana map, I believe. I have a friend that is from the Maelstone area, and so he kind of knows the history there.
So your grandfather was a Johnson, and your grandmother was an Archer. Your mother's maiden name was Johnson.
No, we're missing a generation.
Oh, so it would be in your...
My grandfather, her dad, my mother's father was Skaggs. His wife was Archer.
Skaggs and Archer.
Yeah, see, I need to have this family tree.
So then your paternal grandmother
was Tremble.
Tremble.
T-R-I-M-B-L-E, I think. And there were quite a bunch of them down in the Buffalo area, so I have a lot of second, third cousins once removed, and most of them, they probably don't want to claim me and I don't want to claim them. So, yeah, it would be interesting because Archer's to me sounds like an English name, but I've never really done any research on that either.
Well, that's a nice thing is there's people that care now and they're trying to make those resources easier to find. Before it was pretty hard to
Oh, yeah.
to get a hold of that unless you could go to Ellis Island or to England or to the courthouse and you already knew they were in that town.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure. Of course, I know you can get some wrong information from Ancestry.
A lot of times they're just pulling names. And there's more than one person with that name, no matter how unique you think it is.
Right. Oh, yeah, I've got, there's Henry Skaggs, which is my mother's oldest brother, all through the family. So one of the original ones was a Henry, but that we've traced back. I mean, they've traced back that far.
Okay,
So.
Archer, and to what was that last year?
Tremble.
Tremble.
Yeah.
So did your mother grow up in Montana or?
Yeah, her dad. Well, his brothers. He came from a big family. I think there were two mothers involved. Probably, the first one died, and then the father remarried, and so there's a whole slew of brothers. I've never counted them up, but and most of them I never knew. A lot of them seem to be. They turned out to be sheep herding bachelors, I guess. I don't know, and we just never did. My generation never did know them. My mother's generation did.
They didn't carry on the family line, so there weren't people of your generation.
Yeah.
So then on your mother's side, is she kind of the main lineage that descends from there? You don't have any large branches besides her then? At least none that you're close with?
No, and her generation has all passed away, so it's her youngest sister just died 2 years ago, I think it was, so. And she was doing a lot of family history stuff, so if I can get my cousins to ever share it with me, that would save me a lot of...
I'm trying to piece it all together.
Yeah. So, and it gets confusing, so I need to write down a family tree so you can see, because of the fact that the Stevensons and the Skaggs all came, the Scotch-Irish connection, and then came into the country, before it was probably officially a country. So.
Very deep roots.
Yeah. And it was amazing how they would go back and forth from here to Missouri. You'd think you traveled that road in a covered wagon or whatever once. Of course, then the railroad came in and...
But there's no direct line between Montana and Missouri.
I don't know how they traveled.
I would guess you would have to go to Chicago first, probably.
Probably.
Or maybe Minneapolis. I don't know if there would be spurs to go down.
Yeah, I don't know. And then there was...
There's not many north-south and
no, but there
railroads.
was a southern line that went, so maybe, that went, well, let's see, Ogden, Utah was where the two connected. The ones that started from the
transcontinental.
Transcontinental, yeah. And because I know, because my grandfather was a depot agent, then my grandmother inherited a railroad pass that she could go anywhere for a really reduced rate. because that was a perk of being a railroad.
That was probably pretty valuable back in the day.
Probably, I think they
The
did.
only sizable amount of travel you could do in any reasonable amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
So do you know how your parents met?
They both went to high school in Lewistown. That must have been when they met. My mother was married previously, and so I have two half-brothers. Well, one's passed away, and the one that's still living was in really bad shape. He's 9 years older than me, I guess, so.
And what would their last name?
Barkoff is their last name. And they homesteaded out where the big fire was at
On Louse Creek?
on Louse Creek, on that Indian Butte place. I've been out to the homestead. And so that would have been where my mother met her first husband, because they were homesteaded really close
So
together.
she homesteaded up there with her first husband?
With her parents.
Okay.
Yeah,
and
I don't think, his family homesteaded too, but they never worked the land. A lot of those people didn't prove up their homesteads all the way. They got them almost done, and the drought hit, and they gave up. Although theirs should have had fairly good water. But it's surprising. We used to rent some land up by the Twin Sisters. Do you know where
I haven't
Twin
been up there,
Sisters
no.
are? And there were homestead cabins and stuff up there, and why in heaven's name, I mean, that would definitely just be summer pasture, but I don't know, maybe they maybe they thought they were gonna do mining or something too.
Well, I could show you some places that people had no right trying to make a living on.
Yeah, oh yeah, I'm sure.
But you come out here and you don't know the territory, and someone says, oh yeah, this works really well, and they were on the river bottom and good loam, and you go up here and you're on the highland with some nice gumbo, and if you're not used to this area, you're like, oh, look at that nice dark soil, it's already, and nope, nothing grows there.
Yeah. Well, that's the place on Louse Creek. The soil there down that creek bottom is just so deep and nice, and in fact, Kyle planted his garden up there this year because I don't know whether it was just sub-irrigated enough, or if he did sprinkle, I don't know, maybe watered it out of the river. I don't know how he did it. Maybe it rained enough this year, because
Early on it was, the last couple months not so much.
Pumpkins and all kinds of stuff growing. So, because he likes to plant things.
So your mother and her first husband and your two half-brothers were out there, and then he passed away, it sounds like.
No, they got divorced.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yes, they were divorced.
That's actually kind of surprising for that era. I would have assumed that he passed away for the mortality rate.
Well, yeah, it's, I understand that he maybe was a bit of a heavy drinker, so, and I think that was...
So were your half-brothers in your household then, or, okay.
Yeah, my mother had custody of them.
Was their father ever really in the picture?
I only saw the man once in my life, because you didn't have friendly divorces back in those days. My brothers did, when they became adults, he lived down in Bozeman by then, and they did go and visit him, but the only time I saw him, and I really didn't know who he was, I was supposed to stay out of the way, I guess, was my younger brother had joined the Army and was heading to California, and he stopped by to say goodbye to him. So they must have had some contact over the years that I didn't notice, with him being, 8 and almost 10 years older than me, and
they were basically out of the house by the time.
Out of the house by the time I was too aware of.
And so then you were an only child from the new marriage?
Yeah, and actually my mother would have went to high school in Lewistown, Fergus County High School. They had a high school in Moccasin, but her aunt had a boarding house in Lewistown. So the girls, two of my mother and her sister, got invited to come and live with Aunt, whatever her name was, because she needed help with the boarders, so they got to do dishes
Got put to work.
got to put to work, but they got to go to a school that had more classes and more advantages and what have you, I guess. More students, because Moccasin was not ever a very big school.
So your dad was going to Lewistown as
And he
well.
was, yeah.
So were his folks in town? Were they?
Well, after his dad passed away, some of my grandmother's sisters lived in Lewistown, and so she kind of lived with some of them. She seemed to just kind of float around as far as I could tell. She would have a small apartment, an efficiency apartment, which is basically a one room, and you probably shared the bathroom with the family that owned the house, and had a hot plate and a kitchen sink, and that
Not
was
much more than a walk-in closet.
Yeah, quite small. And so sometimes she rented a room from her sisters, and sometimes she rented from other people. That seemed to be. Well, luckily, I guess she was better off than some widows, because she did have a railroad pension, which it wasn't very much, and then there was.
For the 30s, the railroad was about the railroad and the post office, I've heard, was usually the only salary positions in these small towns.
Oh, I suppose so.
So it was, even if it wasn't much of a pension, it was probably far more than anyone else had even a chance at.
Yeah, and there was some kind of a widow's pension through the county that was like 50 cents or $1. I mean, it was, I've got the paperwork from some of it, and it was just a little pittance. But,
Probably what the
but a
county
stamp
could
only
afford
cost
to do.
3 cents for them to mail it. I guess
Ooh, I
they
can
must
get like 20 stamps.
Yeah. So yeah, it was not much. And when she was younger, when she was first widowed, she worked out quite a bit too. There were always farmers ranchers that wanted dishwashers, scullery maids, more or less, or housemaid type work.
So was your dad an only child then?
No, he had an older brother, but my dad was 5 when his father died, so the older brother was would have been 8, I guess, and the younger brother was just a baby when he died, when the father died in 1918. So the kids would, at first, it seemed like they went to live with some of her sisters, or some of her family. She had both brothers and sisters that lived down in the Judith Gap area, because there's I just read a letter that my Uncle Edward, who was the oldest brother, had written to his mother, because he was spending the summer at some uncle's place, and how he was enjoying it, and he was working, and he was 10 years old or whatever, but he was working. And then in the same envelope is a letter written by the aunt because my dad couldn't write yet, and saying that he was having fun playing with the cousins and what have you. He would have been probably 5 or 6, so it was. And there were so many cases of wives dying, childbirth, or various things, and so it would usually be the husband looking for somebody to take care of his kids. And so a lot of kids ended up being raised by aunt or an uncle or somebody because their father couldn't take care of them. No, I mean it's a little different.
And he might be able to financially take care of them, but could not do both.
Do the both. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So then they met in high school.
High school, yeah.
Then out of high school, she got married to her first husband, had 2 half brothers of yours,
Uh-huh.
had their divorce.
Yeah.
Do you know how they ended up?
I don't really know.
What was he doing for a living? Did he get into farming or
No, my dad
in town?
never was really a farmer. He worked at Power Mercantile in Lewistown, which was a big department store, and I'm sure he worked there while he was in high school too, probably sweeping the floor and that type of stuff, but he was a salesman. That was basically what his whole life career was, being a salesman of one sort or another. And then after they got married, they moved to Great Falls. I was actually born in Great Falls, and he worked for, now this is way gone too many years, you probably have not heard of Ario's Saddlery, but it was, the Arios were quite a wealthy family, and they had saddles. It was called a saddle shop, but it had shoes and
kind of all leather crafts,
leather type stuff, and
which would have been much bigger industry back then.
I think it had like Western clothing type stuff too. So, so my dad worked there for several years, and then jobs were tight back in the 1943 was when I was born, and 43, 45 there were a lot of people riding the rails looking for jobs. They couldn't find a job, so they hop on a train and
the next town,
and try the next town, and they would come knocking on your door wondering if they could do a chore for you to
for a meal, for a nickel,
mm-hmm.
for something.
Yeah, it was different than nowadays, that's for sure. So, but they moved back to, moccasins seemed to always draw them back, because my mom's parents had briefly moved to Lewistown, but they didn't like it, and so they moved back to Moccasin, and my grandfather ran the gas station. So that would have been, I don't know, whenever people started driving cars, I guess.
Well,
pretty much.
In Montana, about 1910.
Well, it would have been,
There wouldn't have been very many, but
No,
they were
yeah.
around.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, by the big land rush in Montana, a lot of those people came up on Model Ts,
Mm-hmm.
and then maybe had their stuff shipped up on a rail car. But a lot of the accounts I've read from 1919, a lot of them might have done a lot of it with the horse-drawn, but there was usually a vehicle around somewhere
Right.
for the quicker transport when the roads were allowed.
I was going to say the roads were the best. It's surprising, as soon as they got cars, how many people went on camping trips to Yellowstone Park and stuff from this area,
right.
In there.
So you were born in Great Falls. Do you remember that, or do you not?
No.
And then you moved to Moccasin.
We moved back to Moccasin.
And that's where most of your childhood was spent.
Yeah, I must have been. I was probably 3 or so when they moved back, 3 or 4 when they moved back to Moccasin. And my dad actually ended up buying the grocery store in Moccasin. He was good at buying things that were just going out of business.
There's probably a reason.
Although, so he ran the grocery store for several years, and then he sold it to my uncle. I'm not exactly sure why. And he sold Mormon feed. There was Mormon feed back when I was a kid. And they had these nice little wooden suitcases the salesman did that had little bottles with all the minerals in it.
Oh, really?
Which was quite intriguing to me when I didn't taste any of them, although I'm sure my dad did,
Most
demonstrate
of the
it.
salesmen do.
Yeah, they would say,
That's a
"Well,
quick way to tell."
This is good stuff, so. And then he did some other work, I guess that would have been after he sold the store that he, I don't know, just did part-time work for, like, a friend of ours raised sheep, and when they were shearing sheep, my dad would help, and I don't know, we seemed to spend one summer up in somebody's cabin in the mountains, and I have no idea I knew what I was doing, but I didn't know, paying attention to what anybody else was doing, because there was a creek right by there that my brothers and I were allowed to swim in, so I've got pictures of us swimming in the creek. That's the only reason I remember it, probably. But
So here's a question that I like to ask. What's your earliest memory?
my earliest memory, it's kind of weird because I remember, and it's something I don't have a picture of, A lot of times if you saw a picture, you think, well, you remember it, but you really don't. You just remember seeing the picture. But my dad had a goiter, which is a thyroid lack of iodine is what causes it, and he had surgery for that. And I can remember, I don't know why, in the olden days, anytime you'd been sick or anything, they put you in a book, close the curtains, put you in a dark room, so you could rest. And I can just remember my dad coming home from the hospital, being in this dark bedroom, and I was, scared to death, but just because, he'd been gone for days, and I didn't understand what having surgery was or anything, but I wasn't very old then. And so I can remember the feeling of my mother and whoever, there were 2 or 3 other adults in the room, and me there, afraid to get close to my dad because you didn't know why he had been gone exactly, and it was it's just kind of back there somewhere in my mind. So that's about the earliest, I guess, that I actually really remember.
So then you went to school in Moccasin?
In Moccasin through 3rd grade, I guess. Then my dad bought the hardware store in Moore. Well, that was in 1953, just about the time everybody had enough money and a car so they could drive to a bigger city to shop. So they would go to Lewistown, to do other things, and then they would buy their hardware needs there. So
you kept buying these businesses as they were kind of on the tail end.
As they were kind of on the tail end, yeah. And
so did you go to school in Moore then? Did your family relocate there?
Yeah. We actually, the hardware store building was a great deal like the Tall Boys building, except it was real rocks, real stones. Tall Boys is made out of bricks that they made that are hollow in the middle. I don't know if you've ever looked at it that close, because to me they kind of look the same, but not really. You could tell the rocks of the hardware store. The 2 side walls were rocks, and then front and back were wood. And basically, as long as the roof was solid, everything stayed together good. But I remember after we sold it, the people they were just using it for a shop to, they tore out, put big doors in the end so they could drive vehicles in to work on them. and they didn't keep the roof solid, and so pretty soon then the rocks, nothing's holding them up anymore.
So was there a living space in the
Well,
store, or did you guys have another house?
They built a living space. I suppose it was, I'm gonna guess, maybe 20 feet wide. They did it the whole length or most of the length of the store, I guess. There was of the rock part of it. So I remember them cutting out, because it was solid rock, they cut out and made a kitchen window and 2 bedroom windows. They tore the rock out and made windows. So it was a little apartment, and it had a door where you could go right into the store, which was handy when people wanted to buy stuff any time of night or day. If you were home,
Well, it seems like what everyone wants you to do anymore anyway. Just live here so you can
so
always serve me.
Wait on them, yeah. And so let's see, they were there from 53 until 60, I guess. And then they had an auction sale and sold. It was the store, plus there was this huge warehouse that had been there for 100 years. I think the store building was about the same as Tallboys. It was 1908 or 1910, something like that. And this warehouse was a wood building, but it was kind of like over the years it had evolved to kind of being like storage units. There were people that rented space to store stuff in them, and oftentimes they died or something and it got left there. So they had a lot of antiques and stuff that in this auction sale.
Probably would have been pretty cool to go through that nowadays.
Yeah, yeah, it was some.
So you said this was
interesting
19.
That would have been 1960, yeah.
So then you probably would have been junior high at that time?
Well, I was out of high school then.
Oh, you were out of high school then. So you did your entire high school in Moore then?
No, I didn't do things quite in order. I got married and then came to school in Hobson.
Gotcha.
So,
okay. Because I thought I had heard that you graduated out of Hobson.
Yeah.
And I've heard bits and pieces of that story.
I went.
Most of the fact that I think that just about everyone, that you've had a hand in writing just about everyone's valedictorian speech for 50 years. Either directly or through plagiarism.
Something. Did you see somebody?
I think me making a noise scared her. Her little toes make a nice little clicky on the floor,
yes,
doesn't
they
she?
do. Yeah. Yeah, that was what Wayne always gave me a bad time. He said, well, I was valedictorian at Hobson just because their teachers were easier. Was that the way he said? No, because I would have been valedictorian and more too. I was the top of my class in there, but and the only reason I was valedictorian at Hobson, I had the best grades, but I don't exactly know why, but Hobson had also, the Buffalo school had closed the same time I came here, because normally you had to go 4 years of high school in the same school to be valedictorian. But since they had all these kids from Buffalo that
they made an
came to
exception.
school, they made an exception. So
it wasn't supposed to really be for you, but it worked.
Yeah, except I would have just as soon not did it because I wasn't going on to college, so I'd signed at that time there was the
valedictorian scholarship.
Scholarship.
Yeah, they've modified it now, so
Yeah,
it's a little.
but I had signed it over to the next person.
Oh,
in
good. So
line,
you could pass it on.
Yeah. And so I just had to write. I had to give a speech, which was not in the things I wanted to do. So.
You'd already written one, it sounds like. So how did you and Wayne meet? Were they did his family already have the ranch kind of between here and Moore, or
down? Well, it's just south just south of Hobson,
Okay, so
where Keith
is,
is.
okay.
Yeah,
So Keith has the place that the brothers grew up on.
yeah, yeah. Let's see now, I forget what. You asked me something else.
So how did you and Wayne meet?
Oh, how did we meet? Yeah. Well, we played, at that time, our schools played basketball together, and he was a smart aleck 8th grader, and all of the more basketball boys just, he was too rough and too all this. So anyway, I met him then, and then we went to church camp up in the Little Belt Mountain, or in the, I guess it's in the Little Belts, up, what is that? I can't think of where you turn off. There was just a picture in the paper, they were making a new bridge into it the other day. I can't even think of what canyon is up there, but.
I'm assuming it's not there anymore, the camp?
Yeah, it's still there.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
More just a campground or like a
No,
facilities?
it's a facility. I think they keep improving the buildings and what
Is that
have
kind of
you.
up back
It's
behind
off like
Sapphire
Monarch.
Village or?
Monarch somewhere.
Like
somewhere.
Nyhart area?
In that area, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know why, because I think White Sulphur in that area came to that church camp too.
Were summer camps like that fairly common? Were
Yeah.
a lot of people able to go to them, or was it more city people with a little more
I
money?
think a lot of people went to them. Yeah, I think they were.
Was it a specific denomination, or was it generic? Christian?
No, I think it was, actually that one was Methodist, yeah. And of course, you seem to, whatever church your town had, that's what Protestant denomination you became, because I started out in Moccasin, had a Presbyterian church with a Presbyterian pastor, so that's where I went to Sunday school. And then Moore had a Methodist church, and Hobson had a Methodist church. My dad was raised Methodist, which is, I don't know what he did with the Lutherans, being from Scandinavia, but people can't believe, like my uncle, my dad's brother worked at the Galen tuberculosis sanitarium. There's Boulder, which is, let's see, what did Boulder start out to be? I think it was handicapped people. Boulder and Galen, and then of course the prison is over in that same area. Warm Springs, yeah, the insane people.
Just kind of lined them all up, didn't
Yeah,
they?
and they just put it all in a row.
These valleys don't have too bad of weather. We'll just do it.
And they must have had some pretty powerful people in the legislature to get all those jobs. Well, Judith Basin County had a terrible fight with Fergus County. And of course they had both got out of Marr County because to start with, it was all Marr County. What was he? Some kind of a general or something who I think was probably, if you look into people, you don't want to get famous because then people look into your past and find out what kind of scumball you are.
Just don't be a scumball.
Well, that's a good thing. But anyway, when my uncle went to work over at the tuberculosis sanitarium, he was a delivery person, was actually what he had a job there driving truck, and he would haul supplies out from Butte or Anaconda, whatever they needed, but the nurses couldn't be married then. And so,
like the teachers.
Back in the day, the teachers couldn't be married. Yeah. So he dated this one. Well, she was the kind of the head nurse. I don't know what her title was, but for a long time. But they never married. Eventually, when they I mean, I'm sure he had given up on ever being married by then, but when they made it so you could be married, then she ended up marrying the head guy of the doctor or whatever he was that was the head of the sanitarium. But, yeah, I remember my uncle talking about going to, they'd get their meat from Deer Lodge, the prison had their own butcher shop. And
Yeah, I think they still have their own dairy and everything.
yeah, I think they do. But
It gives them something to do.
yeah, but back then you drove into the prison itself. He said that was a little bit nerve-wracking. Here's all these prisoners with knives and cleavers, and you go in there to pick up meat for. I guess they've always had the cattle ranch part of it too. Yeah, because I think they bought some bulls from us one time. Yeah.
So we talked about the churches, we talked about the schools a little bit. What else was really the communities like growing up in the through the 50s?
Well, kind of like you see it on Facebook. They say your parents told you go out and play before it gets dark. Come home when the streetlights come on. Come home. You know, we just.
So did you?
Being a city kid, I didn't really have much in the way of chores or anything to do other than help ironing and a few things like that.
There's a little bit of household stuff.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So was there a pretty good crew of kids? I'm assuming, and would have been most of the time that you were that age of running
I
around.
was from 4th grade to 2 years of high school and more. So it's, I got married the end of the mid of my sophomore year. Yeah. But I said I was with my December birthday, and my folks kept me back. You know, it was sort of ambiguous, but when you could start school back in those days, it was not. You had to be born on a certain date. But I was always almost a year older than everybody in my class, and so I always thought they were just little kids. And I'm kind of I'm not antisocial, but I'm can be perfectly happy just, you know, I had to change a lot to learn to be a social butterfly selling cattle, you know. That was not my thing to be out there.
A little bit different world.
Talking to customers and what have you. But.
So when you and Wayne got married, he's had 4 other brothers, right? There was Keith.
He had 2 older and 2 younger.
So there was Keith
Keith's just younger than him.
just younger.
Yeah.
And then who were the 2 olders?
Jimmy
Jimmy.
and Wes, or
Wes.
Sam.
Okay.
Jimmy was the black sheep of the family. He was always in trouble. In fact, Wayne, just being related to him, had a bad reputation because well, Jimmy, I think he got asked to leave school in Hobson, and so he went to school in Moore for a while, and I don't think he ever graduated. I think he went to the Army instead, because he seemed to always be into some kind of trouble. And it probably drinking and wild driving and that type of stuff. It wasn't like well, it wasn't what he should have been doing, but it wasn't like taking drugs or anything like that.
Wasn't extremely bad.
Right,
It was,
yes.
It was extra rowdy for what was normally tolerated.
Right. And yeah. And nowadays, I think they just let the kids do whatever they want. Sometimes, some schools, as long as they don't make too much.
Yeah. So then who was the baby of the family?
Rick, and he
Rick.
passed away from cancer
That wasn't that long ago,
not
was it?
too long ago,
Okay,
yeah.
so then it's just Keith.
Yeah.
What's left? Okay.
Yeah.
And they had actually started up the cattle business with their dad, or
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
almost all of them have been in Angus in one form or another,
Right,
haven't they?
yeah. I think Grandpa Jamie, to me Jimmy's in the family, but Grandpa Jamie, whose dad was also Jim, his dad had homesteaded. Actually, my son Clint has the place where he homesteaded down in the Gumbo Flats.
Surprised he made it.
Well, he didn't really. Let's see. He let it go back for taxes. You know, the state got a lot of their land back in a period of time there. Not sure. I think it probably had to do with the drought. Because, you know, Montana has had climate change forever. When my mother was married to her first husband, and my brothers were just little, is when the grasshoppers ate up most of Montana. So, not sure exactly what year that was, in the 30s, the dirty 30s, I guess. Well, now her husband, actually, he worked up, I believe, in the Geyser, somewhere up in the Geyser area or that direction, poisoning grasshoppers. Now, I don't know exactly what.
I would guess DDT.
Strychnine or DDT, or I don't know.
Does strychnine work well on insects? I know it's
sure.
great on gophers, but I haven't heard of it on insects.
I don't really know, but it must have been something. They must have had some kind of a thing they pulled that powdered this stuff out. Yeah. So I had one flower pot out on the front that Liz and Nate had given me for Mother's Day, and that's the only grasshoppers I had. That plant just, I think they got the plants from a greenhouse at the school, and about midsummer those grasshoppers just, the little baby ones, so they hatched right out of that. Well, and I can remember even when we were first, you know, when Wayne and I were first, we actually worked for his dad, or Wayne worked for his dad when we first got married, and then Wayne raised, he had pigs, he had, I don't remember how many sows he had at the most time, but we had pigs, and not in a facility that was much good to keep them, and some of them just got to be pasture pigs. We didn't have trouble with the wildlife getting them, you know, back in
the
in
wolves
the Midwest,
and the bears and everything are gone.
Well, even the foxes and stuff would get the
really?
babies, I think, or coyotes. It was coyotes we had friends in Iowa that raised pigs, and they had little huts for them out in the pastures, and they just had a terrible time with the coyotes getting them. But,
interesting.
so we raised pigs, we milked cows. We had a very colorful herd of milk cows. We had, there was one Angus cow that had such big teats that, it was hard for calf to suck, so she was really hard to milk too. And we had a brown Swiss cow. We had one Jersey cow, and we had a Holstein cow, and she, what did they call her? I don't know, but every time you started to milk her, it made her pee. She had to pee every time somebody
You put the bucket out of the way. End up with cottage cheese.
She was nervous, you know, and
she knew she was supposed to let something down. That's just the wrong thing.
I think there was a Guernsey. Anyway, there was probably about 10 of them
That's a lot of milk cows.
And we back in those days, you could sell the cream there were creameries in Lewistown, or you could put it on the train and ship to Great Falls, depending on who's had the best price. And then the skim milk we fed to the pigs, and grandma's chickens. We never did raise chickens, but
Oh, really?
Wait.
Chickens will eat milk?
Well, you let it sour, let it get into
Kind of solidify a little?
kind of like cottage cheese, and
Huh.
and they like it, yeah.
I know people do that with pigs all the time. I didn't know that people did it with chickens.
Yeah, so.
Probably makes an interesting egg.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Well, and then this one cow, I can't remember which cow it was. The kids always had bum lambs too. Well, in fact, the first year we were married, Keith and I were in a bum lamb partnership. I got the ewe lambs and he got the wether lambs because he wanted cash and I wanted to build a herd of sheep. And so I think we had almost 30 lambs.
Oof.
And you fed them 3 times a day with the bottles back in those days. Nowadays they've got feeders and stuff. I liked raising them, and
Yeah.
yeah, I had that first bunch of lambs. Of course, Wayne was he was probably doing the night lambing and stuff, and so this one ewe that didn't have much milk, her ewe lamb got to come to the bum pen. Pretty fat. It wasn't sick yet. You know, usually they had to stay down there till they got sick. So she got to come to the bum pen, and she never did get sick. And she, I broke her to lead, and she, so the last time we sold sheep and loaded them on the railroad car, I led her down Main Street and to be the lead sheep. She didn't think that was much fun, and that's the only time I remember them ever putting sheep on a railroad car, and that would have been in 1960, 61, 60, I guess.
I'm assuming there were passenger trains as well?
Mm-hmm.
When did those stop?
Well, there was usually a passenger car, I guess. I don't know, I can't remember really being passenger trains, but you could ride they always had one car or the caboose, so you could go to Great Falls or whatever, but actually when I lived in Moccasin, there were passenger trains that went by there.
And when did they stop letting people ride the trains?
I don't know.
The 70s probably?
I don't know. I don't really know. Guess I didn't pay attention to them then, but...
You were already driving at that point?
Yes. Yeah, we would bring if the cream was going on the train, just had to have it here at a certain time. It was sour cream. It didn't have to be, it could be sour, because I guess they would mix it up and make butter out of it or something, I don't know.
They're probably just going for the butter fat.
So, yeah.
So you said that there was an Angus. Was Angus already pretty prevalent by the 50s,
yeah,
or was that kind of a new thing?
Well,
Were most people still Hereford?
Stevenson's got their first Angus in 1947, their first registered ones. There was an Angus ranch in Lewistown that was quite predominant, and they bought a few heifers from them, and then, because I think they just had calico herd until then, didn't have any, just a assortment.
Just whatever was
Whatever
around,
was,
from
yeah.
the Longhorns into the
Whatever,
Shorthorns into
yeah.
the Herefords.
Yeah, so,
From what I've heard, there was a time, and I'm assuming you guys wouldn't have gone through it, but you would have seen it, that they had an influx of the continental breeds, the Maine
yeah.
Anjou and the Sleers.
Mm-hmm.
When was that? Was that in the 80s, or when did that really happen?
it would have been I think in the 70s,
In the
probably.
70s?
70s to 80s is when that really started, yeah. Well, we rented a place over in let's see, it would be the Judith Mountains, or the end of the Snowies. Yeah, the end of the Snowies. Judith's, I'm not sure where they all come together.
There's so many little pockets of mountains.
Yeah.
I don't quite know which ones are which. I know you got the Highwoods and the Little Belts, and you got the Judiths, the Moccasins, and the Snowies, and I don't know which ones are
and
which.
I'm not sure where the Judiths and the Snowies quit or come together, but we rented this land, and this guy we had to take care of his Hereford cows was part of the deal, and I don't remember how many Herefords he had, but anyway, it was time to get over there to brand, and we didn't have dehorning paste, and then we had a snowstorm, and then we had sunburned bags, and so.
Get out the bag bomb.
So that's why they were like the Angus, because I think there's
The Hereford a little bit more high maintenance.
we do have a lot of bright sunshiny snow in this area. I'm sure probably in places where it's cloudier you wouldn't. I forget what year they brought the first Angus to the United States. We were on a postage stamp, whatever year that was. They had an Angus bull on postage stamp. That's interesting. I'm gonna say, and they're probably still in the garage. I have some books somewhere, or I have a book that's about the Angus. About the breeds of cattle coming.
Yeah, I know I've seen a couple of your Angus books before we made the move. Who knows where they are now?
Yeah, well, all the books that I've found so far are in there, and that's why they won't all fit, because
You need more bookcases.
I need one more bookcase.
Yeah.
But,
So you had Val first, and then Doug, and then Clint, right?
and then Clint, yeah, Clint. Doug's 3 years younger than Val. And we always joked that if he'd been first, he'd have been only child. And you would never know it now well, maybe you would, but he was always into something. He was the one that got the matches and was trying to start a campfire in the playhouse.
Oh.
Luckily, he couldn't get the matches to strike, but Valerie and I were just talking about that the other day. 'Cause I asked her if she remembered, or because I couldn't remember whether she was even there when he was doing it. But he had this nice little pile of grass. It was a nice little playhouse with a linoleum floor and everything. I don't know why he decided that it would be a good idea to light a campfire.
He wanted a fire. From what Lisa said, he was sort of a sick child at times.
Well, yeah, he had. He was just 5, not quite 5, when he started having these symptoms of. If we'd have known more then, if you'd had the internet, you'd have thought he had leukemia or something, because if you pick him up, you pick up a kid and you put your fingers on their torso, his platelets were letting his blood leak so much that you would leave fingerprints on him.
Oh, wow.
And that they diagnosed as this blood disorder called idiopathic thrombocytopenia purpura.
That's quite a mouthful.
Yes.
I'm impressed.
And now they've changed the name. Instead of idiopathic, which means we don't know what causes it, they've changed it to autoimmune, which means they still don't know what causes it.
We know it's not something external.
Yeah.
We cut it in half. It's internal.
Well, at the time when Doug first got it, they were just sure that it had to be caused by some chemical, some spray, something like that. But they've come to the conclusion that they don't. I don't think even with DNA and everything, I still don't think they know exactly, except that what Doug had, it was somehow his spleen had marked his platelets as an invader, and so his spleen was destroying his platelets. And so he was on steroids for about almost a year. That's when you're 5 years old. That's as long. They won't give them to you longer than a year, because they'll do all kinds of bad things. And, when his platelets got built back up, then they would try to cut him down on the steroids, and it didn't work, but finally it got to where his spleen gave up or something and let him come and let his platelets live until I think he was 17. And at the time when he got over it as a small child, they said, oh, he'll never have this problem again. Well, when he was 17, he got it again, and at that time, they gave him steroids for a year, basically same treatment, and but it didn't cure it. It didn't get better. Then every time they tried to cut him down on the steroids, he would start. And you get little purpur is the little blood spots. Yeah.
Not a good sign.
No. And so they took his spleen out, and of course, that was just at the start of the AIDS epidemic. And so, epidemic, was that what you would call it? Anyway.
I believe that's typically what they call it, yeah.
So, we knew there was some reason they were like, you didn't want to get a blood transfusion unless it was life or death. But we didn't share. You know, doctors don't know everything back then like you do now. Or you think you do.
Yeah, they don't know anymore. Just have more questions.
So, anyway, he was able to have his spleen removed without needing a blood transfusion, thank goodness. And that was the first thing the doctor said. Well, he didn't need a blood transfusion. That was good. And it worked. It was just his own body destroying his platelets. So, I don't know, a lot of people lose their spleen due to a car accident or a football injury or something. You used to hear of it more. I mean, because once your spleen started bleeding, you know, from an injury, pretty much the only thing to do was to take it out because it's apparently real squishy tissue or something, and you can't really. It besides your liver, it filters out bad things out of your blood. So, or that's what it's supposed to do. So. But when you get to looking at your different parts that have to work together to make our bodies work, it's a wonder any of us are, that we work as well as we do. My former sister-in-law passed away just recently of it's kind of a type of cancer, but most cancers basically are kind of autoimmune type.
In a sense,
in a sense, because
it's just
your
your
body is not fighting the invaders
or not doing it correctly.
Yeah. So you just never know when your days are numbered.
So all three of your kids graduated from Hobson, I'm assuming.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and they all were big in FFA. Valerie was, well, actually there were a few girls in FFA in Hobson the year she was, or when she started, but she was the only one that really went full force at it, I guess. And she was a state officer, and they were all state officers. They were all state treasurers, I believe. Well, a guy that grew up in Moccasin had been the state guy at one time, Ashcraft, but that was long ago.
Did Val go to college?
Yeah. She started out, let's see, what did she start out taking? Isn't that funny? I can't remember what it was she started out. She must have went 2 years and then got married, and then she went back and got a nursing degree through Bozeman. Back they've changed the registered nursing degree so much now, you know, you can get them.
Well, there's different levels because there's
Yeah,
registered nurse's assistant, and then there's certified nurse and registered nurse, and
yeah,
so then Doug started in Bozeman.
yeah, he
you
graduated,
met
he
Sharon there.
graduated from.
Oh, that's right. He did get his degree
Yeah,
there,
he got his degree in Bozeman.
but Sharon had to go to
Sharon had
Missoula
go
to finish
Missoula.
hers. So
she's a
they got
whiz.
married partway through college.
Yeah. Yeah, that, I can't remember those years, but what day, but she must have been, I think she had to do 2 years at Missoula maybe. One of their buddies works for Triangle, well, he's kind of retired, but he was in on, as Mike Zook. There was a whole bunch of Zooks that were cousins, I think, that were of Doug's contemporaries. I think Mike and him must have been, they were probably on the same state officer team, or maybe Mike was a year older than him.
Yeah. So Doug went to Missoula and got a law degree.
Uh-huh.
Practiced 1 year and said that was enough.
Yes, he did, although he worked the summers that he was going to Missoula. He worked, the first summer he worked for a big law firm in Missoula. I can't remember what the name of it was, but it was that did all kinds of law. But then John Hoyt, who was sort of his mentor and talked him into going to law school, he worked for him the second, and that's who he worked for a year, was for him. And they did trial law, and Doug was not, that was not his thing, I don't think. I think he might have stayed in law if he'd have stayed in, you know, doing, estate planning and that kind of stuff, but that trial law, you know.
The courtroom wasn't for him.
Yeah, well, the one thing he didn't, I got the feeling that he did not like was, if you're in, you have to do quite a bit of pro bono stuff. And usually it's kind of, that's kind of questionable.
Well, if I'm doing the work, I should be getting paid.
Well, and are these people really innocent?
Yeah.
And then Hoyt's had him do all the prep for this trial that was coming up. And Hoyt's specialty was suing the railroad. You know, if your cow got ran over by a train or whatever, that was, he would make sure you got the full value of it. But Doug worked for months getting all this stuff for this trial, and then they settled. So many of them, they settled at the, you know,